News of the armistice broke out as his friends gathered around his body, laid out in his Boulevard Saint-Germain apartment. Seeing all the flags flying along the boulevard, Jean Cocteau later wrote that Apollinaire's friends were able to believe, in the confusion of kinds of heroism, that Paris was bedecked in his honor. The young Swiss architect, Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, who would soon change his name to Le Corbusier, viewed the scene from beneath the 17th century mansard roof of his left bank apartment on Rue Jacob. He had arrived in Paris early in 1917, during some of the most difficult months of the war, and found this tiny apartment in what had been the building's servants' quarters. Charmed by the location as well as by the building's provenance, it had once belonged to a celebrated 18th century actress whose romance with a dashing nobleman led to her poisoning by a rival. Jeanneret transformed his garret into a cozy den filled with cushions, pillows, and a huge divan. Unlike the streamlined Le Corbusier interiors to come, with their bare floors and white walls, Jeanneret decorated this modest flat with black wallpaper, accented with medallions of fruit, and with rugs of black, white, and red stripes. Perhaps to divert himself from the bitter cold and the coal shortages of wartime Paris, he also painted one wall of his diminutive apartment with a landscape of sun-washed tropical palms. Freezing in the winter, and often hungry, Jeanneret nonetheless committed himself to Paris and to the new spirit that already was emerging in the war-torn city. During his first spring there, he attended the avant-garde production of Parade, the iconoclastic joint creation of Jean Cocteau, scenario, Éric Satie, music, Pablo Picasso, sets and costumes, and Léonie de Massine, choreography. Jeanneret loved it. Everything about it was new, brazen, and bold, and he eagerly embraced its spirit. What this actually meant in his own life, though, was less clear. Struggling to establish himself professionally while riding the emotional roller coaster of his own mood swings, the end of the war, this horrible and empty war, left him with one question. What will tomorrow bring? The day after armistice, Claude Monet wrote his good friend Georges Clemenceau to offer two of what he called his decorative panels to the state. "It's little enough," he said, "but it's the only way I have of taking part in the victory." The panels were a portion of Monet's huge project that he called his Grande Décoration, later known simply as his water lilies, on which he had been laboring for years. It was, as their mutual friend and art critic Gustave Geffroy commented, as if Monet had offered a bouquet of flowers to honor victory in war and the conquest of peace. By this time Clemenceau was Prime Minister of France, and having won the war for his nation, was now launched in the equally fraught process of winning the peace. But 6 days after receiving Monet's offer, Clemenceau dropped everything and went with Geffroy to Giverny to make his choice. There is some disagreement over what exactly Monet proposed to give the state in his initial offer. By the time of their visit, Geffroy was already referring to the proffered gift as several rather than two. If so, Clemenceau had been working successfully to increase the number of canvases. But however pleased Monet was by Clemenceau's visit, he quickly retracted his offer. By the month's end, he was flatly refusing to donate or sell any of the enormous canvases, even though he acknowledged that they were cluttering up his studio. "Impossible," he told his art dealer, Gaston Bernheim-Jeune. "I need each of them to work on the others. I am not very fond of public displays," he added in a subsequent letter, and backed off. Thus began a torturous affair in which Georges Clemenceau heroically worked to obtain Monet's water lily panels for the nation, and, at the same time, valiantly sought to convince his longtime friend to undergo a much-needed operation to save his eyesight before it was too late. "Peace," the painter Fernand Léger exultantly wrote his good friend, the painter André Mare. Léger had been severely gassed while serving at Verdun, and Mare was badly wounded on the Picardy front while camouflaging artillery with Cubist designs. Finally, Léger went on, after 4 long years.